The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage, casting long shadows across the breakfast table where Prince William sat with his head in his hands. Kate stood by the kitchen counter, her usually bright eyes red-rimmed. From another sleepless night? The silence between them spoke volumes about the weight they both carried. "The children will be down soon," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the coffee machine. William, not wanting him to see the tears threatening to spill over again. The past few weeks had been a relentless storm of criticism, media speculation, and public scrutiny that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. William lifted his head and looked at his wife, his heart breaking at the sight of her trembling shoulders. They had weathered many storms together, but this one felt different. The attacks weren't just on them as individuals or even as a couple. They were targeting their roles as future monarchs, questioning their every decision, their parenting, their commitment to the crown. "Kate," he said softly, rising from his chair and moving toward her, but she held up a hand, still facing away from him. "Please don't," she whispered. "If you're kind to me right now, I'll completely fall apart, and we can't afford that." Today, the irony wasn't lost on either of them. Here they were, two people who had dedicated their lives to serving others, to being pillars of strength for the nation, and yet they felt more vulnerable and isolated than ever before. The latest round of criticism had begun 3 weeks ago when a series of investigative articles questioned their use of taxpayer money, their private travel arrangements, and even suggested that they were out of touch with the struggles of ordinary families. What hurt the most wasn't the criticism itself. They had grown thick skin over the years of public life. It was the way the narrative had shifted to paint them as privileged and disconnected, when the truth was that they worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often sacrificing their own comfort and privacy for their duties. Kate finally turned around, and William saw the exhaustion etched on her face. She had been pushing herself harder than ever, taking on additional engagements, working late into the night on her charitable initiatives, trying to prove wrong those who questioned her dedication. But the harder she worked, the more the critics seemed to find fault. "The children asked me yesterday why people were saying mean things about Daddy on the television," Kate said, her voice cracking slightly. "George is only 11, but he's starting to understand. He asked if we were bad people." William felt a surge of anger rise in his chest, not at Kate, but at the situation that had brought them to this point. His children shouldn't have to bear the burden of public scrutiny, shouldn't have to wonder if their parents were good people because of what they heard on the news or read in headlines. "What did you tell him?" William asked, though he dreaded the answer. "I told him that sometimes people don't understand the whole story, and that our job is to keep being kind and helpful, no matter what others say." Kate wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But William, I'm not sure I believe my own words anymore. Are we making a difference? Are we truly helping people, or are we just going through the motions?" It was a question that had haunted both of them in recent weeks. They had always found meaning in their royal duties, had genuinely believed they were making a positive impact on people's lives, but the constant criticism had planted seeds of doubt that were now growing into full-blown uncertainty about their purpose and effectiveness. William walked over to the window and looked out at the grounds of their home. In the distance, he could see the security detail that was always present, a constant reminder of their unusual life. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to be ordinary, to make mistakes without the whole world watching, to raise his children without the weight of centuries of tradition and expectation on their shoulders. "Do you remember when we first got married?" William asked suddenly. "You were so excited about the possibilities, about all the good we could do together." Kate nodded, a small smile flickering across her face at the memory. "I was naive then. I thought if we just worked hard enough, cared enough, loved people enough, that would be sufficient. I didn't understand that good intentions don't always translate to public approval." "Maybe that's not our job," William said thoughtfully. "Maybe. Our job isn't to be approved of or even understood. Maybe it's just to serve, regardless of how it's received." "That's easy to say when you've grown up in this world," Kate replied, not unkindly, but with a hint of the frustration she rarely allowed herself to voice. "You've had a lifetime to develop that thick skin." "I'm still learning," And some days I feel like I'm failing not just myself, but you, the children, the institution." Before William could respond, they heard the sound of small feet running down the stairs. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her hair still messy from sleep, followed closely by Louis, who was dragging his favorite stuffed animal behind him. "Mummy, why do you have sad eyes?" Charlotte asked, with the directness that only children possess. Kate quickly wiped her face and forced a bright smile. "Mummy's just a little tired, sweetheart. Nothing that breakfast and cuddles can't fix." But Charlotte, wise beyond her 8 years, wasn't easily fooled. She looked between her parents, sensing the tension that hung in the air like morning fog. William scooped up Louis, who immediately began chattering about his plans for the day blissfully, unaware of his parents' emotional turmoil. But even as he engaged with his youngest son, William's mind was racing. Something had to change. They couldn't continue living under this cloud of doubt and criticism without it affecting not just them, but their children as well. As Kate busied herself preparing breakfast, trying to create a sense of normalcy for their family, William made a silent promise to himself. He would find a way to turn this situation around, to remind both Kate and himself why they had chosen this path of service. But first, they needed to get through today, and all the days that would follow, until that moment of clarity arrived. 3 days later, William found himself standing in his private office at Kensington Palace, staring at a letter that had arrived in the Morning Post. The envelope was simple, addressed in careful handwriting that looked like it belonged to an elderly person. He had already read through the usual stack of official correspondence, meeting requests, and briefing documents. But this particular letter had caught his attention because it was marked personal and confidential in the corner. Inside, written on modest blue paper, was a message from an 82-year-old woman named Margaret from Yorkshire. She wrote about how she had followed William and Kate's work for years, how she had watched them grow into their roles, and how disappointed she was by the recent media coverage. But what struck William most was her final paragraph, "Your Royal Highness, I've lived through enough to know that the loudest voices aren't always speaking the truth. There are millions of us who see your genuine care, but we're not the ones making headlines. Don't let the noise drown out the quiet appreciation of people who truly matter." William set the letter down on his desk and walked to the window. From his office, he could see the busy London street below. People hurrying about their daily lives, most completely unaware of the struggles happening within the palace walls. Margaret's words had touched something deep inside him, reminding him that there was a difference between perception and reality, between media narratives and genuine impact. He thought about Kate, who had barely spoken since their conversation. 3 days ago, she had thrown herself into her work with an almost desperate intensity, as if staying busy could somehow shield her from the pain of the criticism. Yesterday, she had visited a children's hospital and spent hours beyond her scheduled time, sitting with families, holding babies, listening to stories of struggle and hope. The staff had told William later that she had quietly arranged for additional funding for new equipment. But of course, that gesture would never make headlines. The irony was painful. The more Kate tried to prove her worth through service, the more exhausted and vulnerable she became. And the media seemed to feed on that vulnerability, interpreting her emotional investment as weakness or worse. As performative display for public sympathy, William's phone buzzed with a text from his private secretary. "Sir, we need to discuss the upcoming tour. Several venues have expressed concerns about security due to potential protests." He closed his eyes and leaned against the window frame. Even their charitable work was now being overshadowed by controversy. The upcoming tour of Wales, which was meant to highlight mental health initiatives and support for young families, was now being framed as a desperate attempt to repair their damaged reputation. When he arrived home that evening, William found Kate in their bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, with photo albums spread around her. She was looking at pictures from their early married years, images of them at various engagements, genuine smiles on their faces, surrounded by crowds of well-wishers. "I was trying to remember when it felt different," Kate said without looking up. "When it felt like we were actually making a difference, instead of just going through the motions for cameras." William sat beside her and picked up one of the photos. It showed Kate at a primary school, reading to children who were gazing at her with rapt attention. Her face in the photo radiated joy and purpose. "You were making a difference then, and you're making a difference now," William said gently.
Ow.
"Only thing that's changed is how it's being reported." Kate finally looked at him, and he saw that her eyes were dry but hollow. "But what if they're right, William? What if we are just privileged people playing at being helpful? What if all our charitable work is just expensive window dressing that doesn't actually change anything?" "Do you remember Sarah?" William asked, referring to a young mother they had met 2 years ago during a visit to a homeless shelter. "She wrote to us last month. She's in stable housing now, has a job, and her daughter is thriving in school. She said meeting us gave her hope when she had none left." "One person," Kate whispered. "One person whose life is different because of something we did. How many one persons have to add up before it matters?" Kate closed the photo album with a soft thud. "I used to think I was strong enough for this life. When we got married, I was so confident, so ready to take on the world. But these past few weeks, I feel like I'm crumbling from the inside out." William took her hand, noticing how cold her fingers were despite the warm evening. "You are strong enough, stronger than you know. Strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone. Sometimes I look at the children and I wonder what kind of life we've given them," Kate continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "George is already showing signs of anxiety when we leave for engagements. Charlotte asked me yesterday if she'd have to be a princess forever, in the way she said it, William. It sounded like she was asking if she'd be trapped forever." This admission hit William like a physical blow. He had been so focused on protecting Kate from the criticism that he hadn't fully considered how their stress was affecting their children. Charlotte's question revealed a level of awareness that no 8-year-old should have to carry. "Maybe we need to take a step back," William said carefully. "Maybe we need to remember why we chose this path in the first place." "Did we choose it?" Kate asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, just genuine curiosity. "You were born into it, and I chose you. But I'm not sure I ever consciously chose this level of scrutiny. This constant judgment of every word, every gesture, every outfit choice." William was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. She was right, of course, had never questioned his role, because it was simply who he was. But Kate had given up her privacy, her anonymity, her ability to make mistakes without consequence, all for love of him and later for duty to the crown. "I received a letter today," William said finally, and he told Kate about Margaret from Yorkshire. As he spoke, he watched Kate's expression soften slightly. "She sounds lovely," Kate said. "But William, for every Margaret who writes a supportive letter, there are hundreds of people on social media calling me fake, or out of touch, or worse." "Then maybe we're paying attention to the wrong voices," William suggested. "Maybe we need to find a way back to the people who actually matter, the ones we're supposed to be serving." Kate leaned against his shoulder, and for the first time in days, William felt some of the tension leave her body. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I'm scared that we're failing, that we're disappointing people, that we're not enough." "We're enough," William said firmly. "We may not be perfect, and we may not be able to please everyone, but we're enough for the people who truly need us." They sat together, surrounded by memories of happier times. Both William and Kate felt a small spark of something they had been missing. Not hope exactly, perhaps the possibility of hope. The following morning brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. William was reviewing briefing documents when his private secretary knocked and entered with an urgent expression. "Sir, we've received a call from St. Thomas Hospital. There's been an incident, and they're specifically requesting you and the Duchess. It's unusual." William looked up from his papers, immediately alert. "What kind of incident?" "A building collapse in South London Community Center. That was hosting a children's breakfast program. Several families are trapped, and—" The secretary paused, choosing his words carefully. "One of the children who was pulled out asked for you specifically, act by name." Kate appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. Her face had gone pale, but there was something different in her eyes, a spark of purpose that had been missing for weeks. "How old?" she asked quietly. 7 years old? A little girl, named Amara. She's not injured seriously, but she's refusing to leave the hospital until she sees you both. Her mother says she's been following your charitable work and had convinced her family to attend the breakfast program because she heard you had visited similar programs. William and Kate exchanged a look that communicated everything without words. This wasn't a scheduled engagement with photo opportunities and prepared remarks. This was real, immediate, and urgent. "I'll go now," William said, already reaching for his jacket. The drive to the hospital was silent, both of them lost in thought. Kate stared out the window at the London streets, watching ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, and felt a familiar pang of longing for simplicity. But underneath that feeling was something else, a sense of purpose that had been dormant for weeks. When they arrived at St. Thomas Hospital, they were greeted not by the usual formal reception committee, but by harried medical staff and social workers dealing with a crisis. The hospital's media relations team had barely had time to prepare, and there were no photographers positioned for optimal shots, no carefully planned walkthrough. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric emergency consultant, met them at the entrance to the children's ward. Her scrubs were still dusty from the incident site, and her exhaustion was evident. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, shaking their hands briefly. "Mara has been asking for you since she arrived. She's physically fine, minor cuts and bruises, but she's been through a traumatic experience. Her older brother is still being treated for a broken arm, and her parents are shaken but grateful their children are alive." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Dr. Chen explained the situation. The community center had been an old building, converted into a space for local programs. The breakfast program Amara had attended was part of a local initiative to ensure children in the area had a good meal before school, particularly during school holidays when free school meals weren't available. The irony, Dr. Chen continued, is that Amara had convinced her mother to bring her to the program because she'd heard about your work with food poverty initiatives. She told her mother that if it was good enough for the prince and princess to support, it must be worth attending. Kate felt tears prick her eyes. But these were different from the tears of frustration and hurt she'd been fighting for weeks. These tears came from a place of recognition. This was why they did what they did. This was the real impact. Far from the cameras and the critics, they were led to a family room where Amara sat with her parents and younger sister. The little girl was small for her age, with bright eyes and her arm in a makeshift sling. When she saw William and Kate enter, her face lit up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire room. "Oh, you came," she exclaimed, struggling to get up from her chair. Kate immediately knelt down to Amara's level, her formal training forgotten in the face of this child's genuine joy. "Of course we came. We heard you were very brave today." "I wasn't really brave," Amara admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I was scared when the ceiling started making noise. But I remembered what you said on the television about helping other people, so I made sure my little sister got out first." William crouched down beside Kate, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of criticism and media scrutiny lift from his shoulders. Here was a 7-year-old child who had risked her own safety to help someone else. Inspired by something they had said months ago on a television program he couldn't even remember filming, Amara's mother, a woman named Grace who worked a part-time jobs to support her family, approached cautiously. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she began, but Kate stood and took her hands. "You're not bothering us at all. How are you holding up?" Grace's composure cracked slightly. "I nearly lost them today. The building just gave way. If Amara hadn't insisted we sit near the door because she wanted to be ready to say hello to people like you do, we might not have gotten out so quickly." William felt something shift inside him as he listened to Grace's story. This woman had brought her children to a community program inspired by their charitable work, and that decision had potentially saved their lives because of where they chose to sit. The butterfly effect of their public service was playing out in ways they never could have imagined. They spent the next 2 hours at the hospital. It's not just with Amara and her family, but with other families affected by the collapse. There were no cameras present, no official photographer capturing moments for the royal website. This was simply two people doing what they had always done best, connecting with others in times of need. Kate found herself sitting with a teenage boy who had been helping serve breakfast when the collapse occurred. He had managed to help several younger children escape, but had been injured in the process. As she listened to his story, she realized that this was exactly the kind of young person their charitable initiatives were designed to support, someone who instinctively put others before himself. "You probably don't remember," the teenager said, "but you visited my school 2 years ago. You talked about how everyone has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their background. I've been volunteering at the community center ever since." Kate did remember that school visit, though she couldn't recall the specific words she had spoken. But here was proof that those words had mattered, had inspired action, had made a difference in ways she never could have tracked or measured. Meanwhile, William was talking with emergency responders who had worked tirelessly to ensure everyone was safely evacuated. One of the paramedics mentioned that several of the families had specifically asked if the prince and princess would be informed about what happened. "They said you cared about their community," the paramedic explained. "Not just for photo opportunities, but really cared. They wanted you to know that the programs you support actually matter to real people." As the afternoon wore on, William and Kate found themselves energized in a way they hadn't felt in months. This was unscripted, unplanned, and unmediated by public relations teams or media strategies. This was simply human connection in its purest form. When they finally prepared to leave, Amara hugged Kate tightly. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Of course," Kate promised, and meant it completely. As they walked back through the hospital corridors, both William and Kate felt something fundamental had shifted. The criticism and media scrutiny hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt insurmountable. They had been reminded of their true purpose, not by advisors or briefing documents, but by a 7-year-old girl who had shown courage in a crisis and credited them with inspiring her compassion for others. The drive back from the hospital was different from their journey there. Where before there had been heavy silence filled with uncertainty, now there was a quiet energy, a sense of reconnection with something they had almost lost. Kate stared out the window again. But this time she wasn't longing for anonymity. She was thinking about Amara's bright smile and Grace's grateful tears. "I had forgotten," Kate said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Forgotten what?" William asked, though he suspected he knew. "How it feels when it's real, when it's not about protocols or photo opportunities or managing public perception. When it's just about showing up for people who need us to show up." William nodded, understanding. Completely. "I keep thinking about what that paramedic said, that the family specifically wanted us to know what happened. Not because they wanted something from us, but because they felt we cared about them as people, not just as subjects or constituents." When they arrived home, the children were waiting in the living room with their nanny. George looked up from his homework with an expression that was far too serious for an 11-year-old. "Was someone hurt?" he asked immediately. "The security team said you had to go to a hospital." Kate sat down beside her eldest son and pulled him close. "There was an accident at a community center, and we went to visit the families who were affected. Everyone is going to be okay, but it was scary for them. Did you help them feel better?" Charlotte asked, climbing onto William's lap. "I think so," William replied. "Sometimes just letting people know that someone cares about them can help them feel better." Louis, who was only 5, looked confused by the serious tone of the conversation. "Are the bad people on television going to be mean about you helping? Sick people too?" The innocence of the question hit both William and Kate like a physical blow. Their youngest child had absorbed enough of the recent criticism to associate their charitable work with potential backlash. That a 5-year-old should have to worry about such things felt fundamentally wrong. "Sometimes people don't understand why we do certain things," Kate explained gently. "But that doesn't mean we stop doing what we think is right." That evening, after the children were in bed, William found Kate in her study. Not working on official correspondence for once, but writing in a personal journal she had started keeping years ago, but had abandoned during the recent crisis. "What are you writing about?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Today, I want to remember how it felt." Kate looked up from her journal, and William saw that her eyes were bright with something that looked like determination. "I've been so focused on how we're perceived that I forgot why perception shouldn't matter. The critics will still be there tomorrow, William pointed out gently. I know, but today reminded me that they're not the people we serve. Mara and her family, Grace working 2 jobs to make ends meet, that teenager who's been volunteering. Because of something I said 2 years ago, those are the people we serve. And they're not the ones writing nasty articles or posting cruel comments online. William leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it was a strength that had been missing for weeks. So what do we do differently? Kate closed her journal and gave him her full attention. We remember today. Every time we start to doubt ourselves, or get overwhelmed by criticism, we remember that little girl who asked if we would come back. We remember Grace's gratitude. We remember that our work has real impact on real people, even if that impact doesn't always make headlines. Upcoming tour? William asked, referring to the Wales visit that had been causing them both anxiety. We go, but we go for the right reasons. Not to repair our image or win back public approval, but to serve the people who need us to show up. Kate stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the garden where their children played every day. I want George, Charlotte, and Louis to understand that service isn't about popularity or approval. It's about showing up for people, especially when it's difficult. William joined her at the window. You know this won't make the criticism stop. No, but it will make the criticism matter less. Today I remembered that we can't control how our service is perceived, but we can control whether our service is authentic. The next morning brought a surprise that neither of them had expected. William's private secretary arrived early with a stack of letters that had been delivered overnight by special courier. These came from the hospital, he explained. Families from yesterday's incident who wanted to thank you personally. William and Kate sat together reading through the letters. Grace had written about how their visit had helped her daughter sleep peacefully for the first time since the accident. The teenage volunteer had written about how their presence had validated his choice to dedicate time to community service. Dr. Chen had written about how the genuine concern they had shown had lifted the spirits of the entire medical team. But it was the final letter that brought tears to both their eyes. It was from Amara, written in careful 7-year-old handwriting, with help from her mother. Dear Prince William and Princess Kate, it read, thank you for coming to see me yesterday. My mom says you didn't have to come because it wasn't part of your job, but I'm glad you did because it made me feel special. I told my friends at school that you are nice people who really care about children like me. I want to help people when I grow up, just like you do. Love, Amara. P.S. I hope the mean people on television learn to be nicer to you. Kate had to set the letter down and wipe her eyes. She gets it. A 7-year-old understands our purpose better than half the journalists who write about us. William picked up the letter and read it again. She wants to help people when she grows up because of us. That's legacy, isn't it? Not the headlines or the approval ratings, but inspiring a child to want to serve others. We need to frame this, Kate said, taking the letter back. And we need to remember what she wrote every time we start to question whether we're making a difference. That afternoon, William made a decision that surprised even Kate. He called his communications team and told them he wanted to make a statement about the hospital visit. Not a formal statement, he clarified. Just a simple acknowledgement that we were there and why. The statement, when it was released, was unlike anything they had issued before. Instead of focusing on their roles or their charitable initiatives, it simply said, yesterday we were reminded why we do this work. It's not for recognition or approval, but for moments like meeting Amara and her family, and for the privilege of showing up for people when it matters most. The statement was brief, authentic, and completely honest. It didn't address the recent criticism directly, but it didn't need to. It spoke to something deeper, their renewed understanding of their purpose and their commitment to authentic service regardless of public perception. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. But more importantly, it felt right to both of them. They weren't trying to win back approval or manage their image. They were simply sharing their truth, and that truth resonated with people in a way that calculated public relations. Strategies never could. As Kate tucked the children into bed that night, Charlotte asked, Mummy, "Are you and Daddy happy again?" The question caught Kate off guard. She hadn't realized how much their recent struggles had affected their children's perception of their emotional state. "We're getting there, sweetheart," Kate replied honestly. "Sometimes adults have difficult times, just like children do. We're remembering what makes us happy about our work." "Helping people?" Charlotte asked. "Exactly. Helping people." As Kate turned off the light and closed Charlotte's door, she realized that her daughter had summed up in 2 words what had taken her weeks to rediscover: helping people. It was that simple and that profound. 2 weeks later, William stood outside the door of a small community center in Cardiff, Wales, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. This was the first major engagement since their hospital visit, and, more importantly, since their renewed understanding of their purpose. The tour of Wales had been planned months in advance, but now it carried different weight and meaning. Kate stood beside him, and he noticed that her posture was different, not the rigid formality she had adopted during the weeks of criticism, but a natural confidence that came from genuine intention rather than defensive positioning. "Ready?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that reminded him of their early married years, when every engagement felt like an adventure they were embarking on together. "More than ready," William replied, and he meant it. But as they approached the entrance, William noticed something unusual. Instead of the typical controlled environment, with carefully positioned local officials and pre-selected community members, there seemed to be genuine chaos. Children were running around, elderly people were sitting in mismatched chairs, and the noise level suggested real conversation rather than polite small talk. Their advance team looked slightly panicked. "Sir, ma'am, we may need to delay entry. The community seems to have expanded beyond our guest list." William and Kate exchanged a look, and without consultation, both smiled. "No delay needed," Kate said firmly. When they opened the door and stepped inside, the noise level dropped dramatically, but only for a moment. Then, to their surprise and delight, they were greeted not with formal applause, but with genuine cheers and calls of welcome that felt spontaneous and heartfelt. An elderly woman named Megan approached them immediately, ignoring protocol entirely. "We heard you were coming, and we couldn't stay away," she said, taking Kate's hands in hers. "Hey, my granddaughter Bethan has been talking about meeting you for weeks. She's over there, too shy to come forward, but she's been practicing what she wants to say to you." William looked around the room and saw what their team had probably perceived as chaos, but what he recognized as authentic community. There were far more people than had been invited, representing a genuine cross-section of ages, backgrounds, and circumstances. These weren't carefully selected representatives. These were real people who had made the effort to be there because they wanted to be. Kate was already making her way toward Bethan, a teenage girl who was standing near the back of the room with her arms crossed, trying to look uninterested but failing to hide her curiosity. "I heard you've been practicing something to say to me," Kate said with a warm smile. "I'd love to hear it." Bethan's cool facade cracked immediately. "I wanted to thank you for the mental health program at our school. I know people say mean things about you sometimes, but that program helped my best friend when she was really struggling. She said meeting the counselor you helped train literally saved her life." The directness of Bethan's words hit Kate with unexpected force. Here was a teenager who had witnessed the media criticism, but had chosen to focus on the actual impact of their work. Her friend had been helped by a program they had championed, and that help had been life-changing. Meanwhile, Liam found himself in conversation with a group of local business owners who had been struggling to keep their enterprises afloat during difficult economic times. They weren't asking for anything. They simply wanted to share their stories and express appreciation for initiatives that had provided small but crucial support. "The microloan program you backed helped me keep my bakery open," said David, a man in his 50s with flowers still on his apron. "It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to get through the worst months. Now I employ 6 people locally, and we're profitable again." William realized that David probably had no idea about the recent media criticism or public relations struggles. He was focused entirely on practical impact. the difference between keeping his business open or closing, between providing employment or adding to unemployment statistics. As the afternoon progressed, both William and Kate found themselves engaged in the kind of conversations they had been longing for, real discussions with real people about real issues. There were no scripted talking points or carefully managed photo opportunities. There was simply human connection around shared concerns and mutual understanding. Kate spent nearly an hour with a group of mothers who had started a local food-sharing network. They had heard about her work on food poverty and had been inspired to create their own community solution. They showed her how they coordinated through social media to ensure no family in their area went without meals, and how they had expanded to include clothing exchanges and homework help. We called it the Kate Network, one of the mothers said, with a slightly embarrassed laugh. Not because we think you're perfect or anything, but because you showed us that caring about your neighbors isn't just nice, it's necessary. The simplicity and effectiveness of their grassroots organization impressed Kate more than any professionally managed charity she had visited. These women had taken inspiration from her public work and created something that directly served their community's immediate needs. "You've done something remarkable here," Kate told them genuinely. "You've proven that the most effective help often comes from people who understand the problems firsthand." One of the younger mothers, Sarah, stepped forward hesitantly. "Can I tell you something? My kids were asking why people were being mean to you on the news. I told them that sometimes when people do important work, others get jealous or don't understand. But I also told them that the proof of someone's worth isn't in what critics say, it's in what they inspire others to do." Kate felt tears prick her eyes, but these were tears of gratitude rather than hurt. Sarah had not only defended her children, but had used the situation as a teaching moment about service and character. Across the room, William was discovering something equally powerful. A group of young fathers had approached him to discuss their struggles with balancing work, family responsibilities, and mental health. They spoke openly about pressures they faced, their fears about providing for their families, and their appreciation for his advocacy around men's mental health issues. "It matters that you talk about these things," said James, a construction worker with 2 young sons. "When a prince says it's okay for men to struggle and ask for help, it gives the rest of us permission to be human." William was struck by the responsibility inherent in James's words. His public statements about mental health weren't just policy, positions, or charitable causes. They were permission structures that allowed ordinary people to address their own struggles without shame. "My eldest boy is 8, James continued. "He's been worried about me working long hours and being tired all the time. But after I heard you talking about the importance of fathers being emotionally available, I started making changes. We have feeling talks now where we both share what's been hard about our day and what made us happy." The ripple effect of public advocacy was playing out in real time. William's willingness to discuss mental health challenges had influenced a father's parenting approach, which was now positively affecting a child's emotional development, as the visit extended well beyond its scheduled time. Neither William nor Kate showed any inclination to leave. Their security detail and advance team were clearly anxious about the uncontrolled environment and extended timeline. But both royals seemed energized rather than drained by the authentic interactions. The turning point of the day came when Megan, the elderly woman who had first greeted them, called for everyone's attention. "I want to say something," she announced in a voice that commanded respect despite her small stature. "I've lived in this community for 73 years. I've seen politicians come and go. I've seen celebrities visit for photo opportunities. And I've seen plenty of people who claimed to care about us but were really just passing through." The room fell completely silent, and William felt a moment of uncertainty about what she might say next. "But today I watched these 2 people spend hours listening to our stories, asking real questions, and showing genuine interest in our solutions to our own problems. They didn't come here to tell us what we needed or to give us a lecture about how grateful we should be. They came here to learn from us." Megan paused and looked directly at William and Kate. "I don't know much about social media or newspapers, or whatever people are saying about you elsewhere. But I know good people when I see them, and I know authentic care when I experience it. And what I experienced today was 2 people who genuinely love the work they do and the people they serve. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't polite, ceremonial clapping. It was the kind of enthusiastic, heartfelt appreciation that comes from genuine emotion rather than social obligation. As they finally prepared to leave Bethan, the teenager who had spoken to Kate earlier approached them both. "I have something for you," she said, pulling out a handmade card. "It's from all of us, but especially from my friend who couldn't be here today, the one who was helped by your mental health program." "I have something for you," she said, pulling out a handmade card. "It's from all of us, but especially from my friend who couldn't be here today, the one who was helped by your mental health program." Kate opened the card to find dozens of signatures and messages, but the main message was written in careful teenager handwriting. "Thank you for showing us that service isn't about being perfect or popular. It's about showing up and caring, even when it's hard. You inspire us to be better people." William read over Kate's shoulder, and both felt the profound impact of those words. This community had witnessed their recent struggles through media coverage. But instead of judging them for their imperfections, they had appreciated their authenticity and persistence. As they walked back to their car, Kate turned to William. With an expression of wonder, "Did you feel that?" she asked. "Feel what?" "That was joy? Pure, uncomplicated joy in the work itself? I haven't felt that in months." William nodded, understanding completely. It's because it was real. No media strategy. No image management, just genuine connection with people who matter. The drive back to London was filled with animated conversation as they processed the day's experience. They talked about specific individuals they had met, solutions they had learned about, and programs they wanted to explore further. For the first time in weeks, their conversation was focused entirely on the substance of their work rather than the perception of it. When they arrived home, children were waiting eagerly to hear about their day. Instead of the usual brief summary of official activities, William and Kate found themselves sharing detailed stories about the people they had met and the things they had learned. "It sounds like you had fun," George observed, and his parents realized he was absolutely right. They had rediscovered the joy in their work, and that joy was evident to everyone around them. 6 months had passed since that transformative day in Cardiff, and William found himself standing once again outside a door that would change everything. But this time, it wasn't a community center or hospital, it was the front door of their own home. And he was returning from what had been the most challenging but rewarding day of his royal career. The morning had started like any other, with the usual briefings and scheduled appointments, but then his private secretary had received an urgent call from Downing Street. There had been a major flooding incident in northern England, and multiple communities were in crisis. The government was coordinating relief efforts, but they specifically requested William and Kate's presence not for symbolic support, but because local officials knew their approach. It evolved into something more substantial and effective. Kate had been in the middle of a video call with international partners about a new maternal health initiative when William found her and explained the situation. Without hesitation, she had ended her call and gathered the emergency supplies they now kept ready for such occasions. "How bad is it?" she had asked as they prepared to leave. "Bad enough that they're asking for us specifically, not just any royal representation," William had replied, and they both understood the significance of that distinction. The helicopter ride to the affected area had given them an aerial view of the devastation. Entire villages were underwater, families had been evacuated to emergency shelters, and the landscape looked like something from a disaster movie. But as they flew over the affected region, William noticed something that filled him with both pride and determination. Volunteer groups were already mobilizing. Emergency services were coordinating efficiently, and communities were coming together to help each other. When they landed, they were met not by formal reception committees, but by emergency coordinators, who immediately briefed them on the most urgent needs. There were 3 temporary shelters housing displaced families, several elderly residents who had refused to evacuate and needed personal persuasion to leave their homes, and a group of volunteer rescue workers who had been working for 36 hours straight and needed morale support. "We need you to be yourselves," the emergency coordinator had said simply. "Not royal representatives, just two people who know how to connect with others in crisis. And that's exactly what they had done. For the next 12 hours, William and Kate had worked alongside emergency responders, volunteers, and displaced residents. They had helped serve meals in evacuation centers, sat with elderly residents who were grieving the loss of their belongings, played games with children who were scared and confused, and listened to countless stories of loss, fear, and remarkable community resilience. Kate had spent 2 hours with a mother named Jennifer whose home had been completely destroyed, but who was more concerned about her neighbors than her own losses. Jennifer had organized the children in the shelter into groups to help distribute supplies and keep younger kids entertained, turning what could have been chaos into something resembling community. "I learned this from watching you," Jennifer had told Kate matter-of-factly. "Not from any specific thing you said, but from watching how you always seem to focus on what needs to be done rather than what's going wrong." Meanwhile, William had found himself working with a team of local volunteers who had been using their own boats to rescue people from flooded homes. These were ordinary people, mechanics, teachers, shop workers, who had risked their own safety to help their neighbors. They worked with an efficiency and selflessness that put many professional operations to shame. "This is what Britain looks like when it matters," one of the volunteers, an electrician named Tom, had said as they pulled another family to safety. "No one's thinking about politics or class or any of that rubbish. We're just people helping. People." But it was the final encounter of the day that had affected William most profoundly. As evening approached, it visited the home of an 89-year-old man named Arthur, who had refused to evacuate despite rising water levels. Arthur lived alone, was fiercely independent, and had survived the London Blitz as a child. He wasn't going to be intimidated by some floodwater. When William and Kate arrived at Arthur's house, accessible only by boat, they found him sitting calmly in his kitchen, water up to his ankles, reading a newspaper by lamplight. "About time someone showed up," Arthur had said with dry humor, "though I expected the emergency services, not the future king and queen." What followed was a conversation that would stay with William for the rest of his life. Arthur spoke about his experiences during World War II, when communities had pulled together in the face of existential threats. He talked about the difference between performative concern and genuine care, between leadership that commanded from a distance and leadership that served alongside others. "Your grandmother understood this," Arthur had said, referring to the late Queen Elizabeth. "She knew that being royal wasn't about being above people, it was about being among them when it mattered most." But then Arthur had said something that struck even deeper. "The problem with your generation of royals isn't that you don't care, it's that you sometimes forget that caring isn't about being perfect, it's about being present." As if to prove his point, Arthur had then agreed to evacuation, but only if William personally helped him gather a few precious belongings. For the next hour, the future King of England had waded through floodwater, carefully wrapping photographs and mementos, while an 89-year-old man directed him with the authority of someone who had lived through genuine hardship. "You are," Arthur had said, as they finally departed his home. "Both of you. Don't let the critics tell you otherwise." As William stood outside his front door 12 hours later, exhausted but energized, he reflected on how much had changed. Since that morning of despair 6 months ago, the criticism hadn't disappeared. There were still negative articles, still social media attacks, still questions about their relevance and effectiveness. But those voices no longer defined their understanding of their purpose or their worth. Kate appeared beside him, equally tired, but with the same sense of fulfillment that he felt. "Ready to face the children's interrogation about our day?" she asked with a smile. "More than ready," William replied, and he opened the door. George, Charlotte, and Louis were waiting in the hallway, still in their pajamas despite the late hour. Their nanny had clearly allowed them to stay up to hear about their parents' emergency mission. "Did you save people?" Charlotte asked immediately. "We helped," Kate replied carefully. "But the real heroes were the people who were already there. The volunteers, the emergency workers, and the community members who were taking care of each other. Were you scared?" George asked, with the seriousness that had become characteristic of him as he grew older and more aware of his parents' responsibilities. William knelt down to his son's level. "Sometimes But being scared doesn't mean you don't help. It means you help anyway. Louis, who was now 6 and increasingly interested in his parents' work, had a different question. Are the mean people on television going to say nice things about you now? Kate and William exchanged a look over their youngest son's head. Louis's question revealed that even at 6, he had absorbed the reality of public criticism of his parents' work. Maybe some will, maybe some won't, Kate replied honestly. But that's not why we do this work. Then why do you do it? Charlotte asked, and William realized this was one of the most important questions his daughter would ever ask him. Guess when people need help, we want to be the kind of people who show up, William said simply. Not because we have to, but because we want to. That night, after the children were finally in bed, William and Kate sat together in their living room. Still processing the day's experiences, the house was quiet, but both felt a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. Keep thinking about what Arthur said, William said quietly. About caring not being about perfection, but about presence. Kate nodded, curled up beside him on the sofa. And about your grandmother understanding that being royal meant being among people, not above them. Do you think we've learned that now? William asked. Really learned it, I mean? Kate considered the question seriously. I think we're learning it. I think today proved that we can trust ourselves to respond authentically when it matters. Rest the criticism, the media management, the public perception, that's just noise. William pulled her closer, thinking about all the people they had encountered that day. Jennifer organizing children in the evacuation center, Tom risking his safety to rescue neighbors, Arthur maintaining his dignity and humor even in crisis. These were the people they served, and these people understood their value even when others. Didn't I want to tell you something? Kate said suddenly. I got a letter yesterday that I haven't shared with you yet. She reached for her purse and pulled out a familiar piece of blue paper. William recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Margaret, the elderly woman from Yorkshire, who had written to him months ago during their darkest period. Dear Your Royal Highnesses, Kate read aloud. I have been watching your work over the past months, and I wanted you to know that something has changed. You seem more yourselves now, more genuine in your interactions with people. I don't know what happened to bring about this change. But as someone who has watched you both grow into your roles, I can see the difference. You have found your authentic selves as public servants, and it shows in everything you do. The critics will always exist, but the people you serve see the truth. Keep being present. Keep being real. Keep showing up. With admiration and gratitude. Margaret. William felt tears prick his eyes as Kate finished reading. Margaret, who had written to encourage them during their lowest point, had noticed their transformation and taken the time to acknowledge it. She's right, William said. Something has changed. We have. Kate folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Do you remember what you asked me that morning when everything felt hopeless? You asked if we were making a difference. And what's the answer now? Kate smiled, and in that smile, William saw the confident, purposeful woman he had fallen in love with, but also something deeper, the wisdom that came from struggle, doubt, and ultimate renewal of purpose. The answer is that we were always making a difference, she said. We just lost sight of it for a while. But the difference was always there, in Amara asking us to come back, and Sarah defending us to her children, and Jennifer learning leadership. By watching us, in communities coming together because they had seen us value community service. William nodded, understanding completely. Their work had always mattered. They had simply allowed external criticism to obscure that truth temporarily as they prepared for bed that night. Both William and Kate felt something they hadn't experienced in months, complete confidence in their purpose and their approach. They were no longer trying to manage their image or win approval. They were simply committed to showing up authentically for the people who needed them to show up. The criticism would continue. The media scrutiny would persist, and there would undoubtedly be future moments of doubt and difficulty. But they had learned something invaluable. Their worth as public servants wasn't determined by public approval, but by their willingness to be present, authentic, genuinely caring when it mattered most. And that lesson learned through struggle and renewed through service would carry them forward into whatever challenges lay ahead.